Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Vince. Here I like to talk about books and ideas that I think you should know about. If that sounds interesting to you and you like content like this, hit the subscribe button. Today I'm going to look at Richard Rohr's latest book, and according to him, his last book, and that is The Tears of Things. I'm going to start off this summary with two problems that I have with Rohr, and they both have to do with clarity, not content. And I hate to start off a summary with problems that I have with an author or a book, especially the book that I'm telling you that you should know about, but I think it's very appropriate in this case because both these problems are going to show why summarizing Rohr's works is very difficult. Some of you no doubt will look at both the things I say as strengths of his instead of weaknesses, and that very well might be. They're both good ways of teaching. They allow a chance for people to reason things out on their own. However, try writing a summary of his works and you'll see why they frustrate me. These problems, by the way, are also problems that I have with understanding N.T. Wright. So if you've ever read him, you could substitute his name into this. The first problem I have when reading Rohr is that his books don't typically have a clear flow. He usually doesn't have a clear thesis. Now, to be fair, in this book, he does specifically say that he has a thesis, and he tells us what it is. But it's not really his thesis. He talks about an awful lot of things, and that just happens to be one of them. So what he says is just really a part of what he's trying to do. And all of his books that I've read are very similar in this way. And that makes it very difficult when reading his books because without a clearly stated path, in my opinion, then you sort of walk around and you gather tidbits of information. So you walk away from the book thinking, man, he's really wise. And he is, and he says some very wise things, but you aren't exactly sure why he said them or in what context, at least for me. So I hope this video helps put them in context. The second thing I have a problem with is that he doesn't give solid examples, or really any examples. For instance, he uses words like conservative, liberal, and progressive, which he admits are very limited words and maybe not particularly helpful, but hey, we all use them. They are very helpful because everybody kind of knows what you're talking about. But he'll talk about problems that both of them all have, which sounds correct and wise, but then he doesn't give real-world examples. So I'm left wondering, well, what exactly do you mean? Here's a for instance. At one point he says, this is a quotation, "Progressives must get out of their heads and move beyond the political correctness that passes for enlightenment." Well, is he saying that progressives shouldn't be politically correct? Does he mean that they should be even more so? What exactly does he mean by political correctness? Is he saying that progressives just shouldn't make such a big deal about it? Just one simple example would have meant an awful lot, right? In this manner, at one point, he also says that liberals are too focused on individualism. And I'm, again, not sure what he means. That, in fact, is not my experience at all. In my experience, liberals are more focused on the collective and less focused on individualism. So, again, just a simple example would help me there. Okay. So what I'm trying to show is that whenever reading Rohr, I think that we are always interpreting Rohr. And so in this summary, just like in every summary, every interpretation you'll get of Rohr, there's going to be an awful lot of my own thoughts, trying to make connections and trying to tease out what exactly he means. So I hope it all helps. It helped me. All right, so let me start with what I think is his main point or his thesis. And it comes from the subtitle of the book, Prophetic Wisdom for an Age of Outrage. And I would say it like this. In this time of outrage and anger, we need to follow the wisdom of the prophets who show us how to move out of anger into sadness and eventually into love and hope for reconciliation and restoration that only God can provide. So that's how I would summarize what he's trying to do here. Okay. This is a book about the prophets, and one thing I need to make clear from the start, many Christians have no idea anything about the prophets, as Rohr mentions. They do know, though, that the New Testament authors, especially the Gospel of Matthew, and Christian traditions say that the prophets predicted the coming of Jesus. And so in the minds of many Christians. The only thing good about the prophets is that they were fortune tellers, or they could see the future. They would say to people, hey, I know things look bad now, but don't worry, in 500 years, God's going to send a Messiah. That's not true. Like, that's not what they do. Even these verses that Christians point to, and they say that they point to Jesus, even if they do, and even if the prophets really did predict Jesus, that's not why they're important. That's less than 1% of the verses of the prophets. The prophets do a whole lot more than that, and that's what Rohr is getting at. He's going to show us why the prophets are so important. All right, let's start off with the nature of religion and the role of the prophets. 1, order, disorder, and reordering. This is a major part of the book that you really have to get clear in your head in order to understand what he's doing here. To Rohr, healthy growth, or good religion, or what we might even say is a healthy development of our understanding of God, should go through periods of order, disorder, and reorder. For those of you philosophers out there, you might think this is very similar to Hegel's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. However, Rohr would say that all of these periods, including the antithesis, is sacred. Also, Rohr's not talking about history progressing. He's talking about our understanding of God. I did a Bible study, which you can find on my channel, where I tried to give just a quick overview of the Bible. And what I did was I tried to show that the main thrust of the Bible was God seeking to redeem all of creation through a series of covenants. And so it was the same kind of progression where God makes a covenant with Abraham, or Rohr would say establishes a new order. Abraham's family is not faithful to that covenant and falls into a period of disorder in Egypt. God brings them out of Egypt and establishes a period of reorder, which eventually becomes the period of the new order, and that's that starts with the new covenant or the law. And then after that period of order, we get disorder again, and then we get reorder, and so forth and so on. So for my Bible study, I didn't call these order, disorder, and reorder. I would say covenant, falling away from the covenant, or not being righteous to the covenant, and then a new covenant. Looking through Rohr's lenses through this book, I think he would agree with me for much of my Bible study. However, what he would say that I didn't say is that these periods of disorder are also sacred periods. And I thought that was a very profound thought. Even our periods of chaos and suffering, or even unrighteousness, are sacred moments, and we often don't treat them as such. And this is a consistent thought that Rohr has, that often he talks about our suffering or our falling away that helps shake us up and teach us lessons on how to shed our egos and grow closer to God. So let's say we start with a period of order. In the period of order, we have, let's say, set traditions that we observe. We maybe have hymns that we sing. We have a set calendar that we follow. All of these things are designed to help us worship God, to feel close to God, to be the person that God wants us to be. And all this stuff is not bad. I mean, remember, these periods of order started off as the period of reorder, right? They were the new period. The bad thing is that we get stuck in the period of order. We start to worship the order instead of God. In fact, Rohr calls this phase establishment thinking. In the order phase, the system grows in power and that's always at the expense of some other group. This, by the way, reminded me of Michel Foucault. Foucault argued that power structures are always forming and reforming. And one way a power structure does this is by marginalizing a group. Also, the group in power at a certain time gets to control what truth is. So they're able to say what is true for everyone, the power structure. And this certainly sounds true today in America, right? Like everyone is claiming that their side has the truth and that the other side is fake news. And these sides have such a hard time talking with each other because they both disagree on who gets to say what truth is. By the way, that means that whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, your side is also guilty of trying to claim power by saying it knows what the truth is. Anyway, What we need in our period of order is to get out of that stage, for something to come along and critique that stage, and then help us lead us into a period of disorder. The priest, either in ancient Israel or today, and for Protestants we might say preacher, doesn't do this. Priests and preachers like order. We're very comfortable with it. In fact, we're too comfortable with it. This is why Rohr points out the church always seems to get along so well with worldly powers. He says, this, more than any other reason, is why Christianity did little to reform or evolve the Roman, Holy Roman, Russian, French, Spanish, English, or American empires, but instead slept comfortably with every one of them. The evils that ate us alive were seldom called evil because the priestly groups were intent on enforcing ritual requirements and purity codes in which Jesus and the prophets showed little or no interest. I found this to be one of those profound statements in the book, and of course, it is so evident today in America, especially in the evangelical church, preachers preaching pro-American politics from the pulpit, and you can imagine this being done in every era with every empire. We want to make sure that we stay on the good side of the power. In fact, he has a quotation there where he talks about how we really have limited or taken this prophetic role away from priests once we started giving them adorning costumes to wear and nice big hats and scepters to carry around. Like that's the epitome of a priest being very comfortable inside of the order. So this self-critiquing role that any religion needs in this period of order can't be done by anybody who is comfortable with the power. The role is done by the prophet, or at least it was the role of the prophet. The prophet's job was to critique and disrupt the system of order that oppresses while keeping us comfortable, to move us into disorder where we can reevaluate, find God, and move into a reordering where we love others and we love God more completely. Okay, number 2, sins of the community. So let's take a closer look at what happens during these periods of order that sours them, right? They start off as this reordering. They start off that we are loving others, we're close to God, and then they get sour. And what does that? Well, for one thing, the community starts to overlook the sins of the community and starts to put the blame on individuals. Rohr gives a very interesting example here with John the Baptist. He calls John the Baptist an incomplete prophet, but he says we talk about John the Baptist as though he is what we should aspire to be, when in actuality he's not. In fact, he gets stuck in these sins of the individual, calling out Herod for his sin. Jesus, however, moves beyond John the Baptist and says, this is in Matthew 11, he says, John is great and all, but the least in the kingdom of heaven is better than John. And then Jesus goes off denouncing all of these towns and communities. And so what Rohr is saying is, the message is that it's not the individual who we need to be focusing on, not individual blame, it's everyone. This desire to blame the individual rather than the whole community is much better for the comfort of the community because it means the community doesn't have to change. So, for instance, I think one of the best examples of this is the murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis police officer, Derek Chauvin. When black communities had been complaining about police brutality for years or decades, it finally was made known worldwide that, yes, this does happen. But instead of admitting that there was something fundamentally wrong with the police force, that all these undertones of racism, something that study after study has shown, it was easier to say that Chauvin was a lone violator. Further, don't think this is just about the police force. In fact, if we went from blaming Chauvin to blaming the police, we're just shifting the blame. And the reason I think this is such a great example is because the role of the police is to protect the order. And we like the order. So the racism that killed George Floyd is a racism that's deeply embedded, not just in police departments, but in our whole society. The police, remember, protect us, or at least the people in the majority. So if we're truly uncomfortable with any racism that's present in the police department, then they would change that. But the majority of us aren't. We're very comfortable with what's happening. We need prophets to point out that these collective sins, to point out that individual sins usually point to the sins of a very sick society. Rohr says, that is why, though Jesus healed individuals, he simultaneously critiqued the systems that made them need healing. Okay, so that's how in order we start to see the individual over the collective, so that we don't need to change anything. A second thing that happens during this period of order is that we start to gain what Rohr calls a bias for the top, when God, on the other hand, has a bias for the bottom. And that is, we start to like money, we start to forget about the poor, we start to favor the majority, and we start to disregard the minorities. In that Bible study I mentioned earlier, remember I was trying to give this brief introduction to the Bible, and when I talked about the prophets, I copied some verses from each prophet, just so I could say, hey, here's a good feel for what the prophets say. And what I said was, like, if you don't remember anything else about the prophets, they condemned oppression and our overlooking of the poor. Like, that is consistent in every prophet. The other thing, by the way, and this we'll get into a little bit later, is that they are also very consistently hopeful for a universally inclusive future. This bias for the top that we have is not really hard to see. I mean, we love the rich as a society. We love the rich, and we believe they worked hard and were blessed for getting what they got, whereas our society often sees the poor as lazy or even cursed by God. But God, Rohr says, has a bias for the bottom. God is revealed most in the people who are forced to go without. He says that we get comfortable with order. We start thinking that that's the way things are supposed to be. However, the poor, he says, know in their bones that something is wrong. He says that God is always present in the oppressed, and in fact, Rohr calls them a remnant. So a small group of people that always speak for God. I don't know if you're familiar with remnant talk in the Bible, but we're always told that there is like this small group of people who carry God's message forward and preserve God's message even when society loses sight of it. And this is in the Bible called the remnant. And Rohr indicates that this is the minority or the poor. This, by the way, reminded me of James Cone's God of the Oppressed. Cone is the father of what he called black theology. And in that book, he makes the claims that when we look for God and God's message, we should not just look at the Bible. We need to look at the oppressed community to hear God's words, because God speaks through the oppressed community. By the way, if you're thinking, well, we also have traditions, and we can look at traditions to find out what God wants. Cone would say, absolutely not, because traditions are made by the majority culture, and they're made to maintain that majority culture. Again, this is similar to, but not exactly what Rohr is saying about the remnant. One thing that Rohr and Cone would agree with, however, is that to get closer to God, to figure out what it is that God wants for us, to hear God's message, you need to get closer to the oppressed communities and to hear their messages. Like Jesus, the answer is found with hanging out with tax collectors and sinners, and not hanging out with the political and religious leaders. Okay, number 3, evolution of the prophet. So the prophet comes on the scene, and the prophet goes through this same kind of evolution that a healthy religion should go through. The prophet is first in this period of order, and then goes into disorder, and finally into reorder. We could also characterize this as anger, sadness, and then hope. By the way, this is why Rohr says it's meaningless to quote the prophets, or any of the Bible really, without reading through the whole thing and seeing what it means. Because sometimes when you quote, you're quoting them at an immature state when they're still in this period of order, or even disorder. You have to be able to read and to grow with them. So the prophets start off in this ordered state. They want everyone to act like they should, everything to be like it should be. They get mad when they look around them and they see that society is not like it should be. It's not doing the things it should do. They see that society's favoring the rich over the poor, or the violent over the passive, or the majority over the minority, or they're scapegoating individuals in favor of the community. And so in this period of order, they get very angry. They do things like call down fire from heaven. They call bears out of woods to attack children. They wish for utter destruction to overtake the people. This is very much the state that many of the people today in our society are in, right? Like, our society is in a period of order, ritual, and comfort over acceptance and sharing of others' burdens, and we get really mad at it. Most of us are just plain angry. We shake with anger anytime we hear the news, and we don't know what else to do. So we look to the prophets to see what to do. And what the prophets do is that they then realize that anger is not really the correct emotion here. The correct emotion is really sadness. And this is what needs to happen to us. Rohr says, they, the prophets, know that grief and sadness are doorways to understanding life in a non-egocentric way. Tears come from both awe and empathy, and they generate even deeper awe and deeper empathy in us. So what he's saying is that we should be saddened that things are not the way that God created them to be. We discover that there are tears in everything. It's sad that people hurt other people. It's sad that people steal, and it's sad that they maybe feel like they have to steal, or it's sad that they do have to steal. I preached a sermon one time, and I'll look to see if I posted on my channel. If I did, I'll put a thumbnail here. But when the disciples ate the Last Supper with Jesus, Jesus said, "One of you will betray me." And all the disciples were sad or saddened. And I thought that was kind of odd, because I feel like they would have really gotten mad, stood up, yelled, demanded to know, who is it among us that's going to betray us? String him up. But instead, they were sad when they heard that. And I thought, that might be because of the question that they asked. Each of them, one by one, looked at Jesus and said, "Is it me? Am I the betrayer?" And they were sad because they knew that it possibly could be. And in fact, each of them would end up betraying Christ in some way. And so it's this introspection of empathy and sadness that we gain by looking around at everybody and everything. Rohr says that he believes all anger comes from deep sadness. We're not sure how to handle the suffering or life's disappointments, and we don't let ourselves cry. So instead, we get angry. And that's where all of our anger comes from. That's why we have so much anger today. Prophets encourage us to get rid of our anger, to be comfortable in our sadness, and our sadness leads us to God, to love, and to grace. Sadness is necessary, he says, because tears encourage us to move forward, not by shame or guilt, although there is such a thing as good guilt and needed shame, but by sadness and empathy. Rohr says that the prophets then, because of their sadness, are able to arrive at a period of reordering. He says that we can always recognize a period of reorder because it is always less violent and more universal than all the periods before it. This reordering is a period of grace when the prophets realize that God loves because that's what God does. Everyone is accepted just because of who they are. There's no meritocracy. There's nothing you can do. In fact, at one point he says the prophets can be characterized by the phrase, nevertheless. And I think his best representation of this is, in my opinion, in the discussion of Ezekiel. Ezekiel rails on the people and he talks about all the things they've done wrong. And then out of nowhere, God says, "But I treat you by my standards, not yours." And then he just starts to talk about love and acceptance and grace. And that's this period of reordering. 4, characteristics of a prophet. So who is the prophet today? Are there any prophets today? Are you a prophet? In one chapter, he gives a list of qualities that a prophet has, but really these characteristics are sprinkled throughout the book, so you can't just turn to that one chapter. A prophet is able to listen, to understand, and to respect the other side. She or he is detached from their message enough that it is not their own opinion. And they don't have to be right. Rohr says, false prophets are precisely those who confuse their own agenda with God's agenda. Prophets seek truth from other authorities like the Bible, but they're also able to question those authorities. They don't just have to say things like, the Bible says so. Their motivations are pure, so they don't just say things so that they can get something out of it, like money, or but this can also include just a feeling of satisfaction for being right. Like, they don't have to be right. He says the reward of the prophet is simply that they get to speak the message. Okay, number 5, scapegoating and anti-scapegoating. And this is probably the most important part of the book, and hence my reason for saving it for last. I want to make sure that we understand where he's coming from with the book in order to get this last most important thing. And that is this concept of scapegoating. Here, Rohr refers to the research done by Richard Rohr, which, by the way, I have a video on if you're interested in pursuing this idea of scapegoating further. In a nutshell, what Girard says is the majority culture always finds a minority culture to place all their blame on. And we can obviously see this today with illegal aliens, the LGBTQ community, and the black community, and really all minority communities, but those are the big ones that we see today. Now, scapegoating is not always, well, in fact, it's very rarely obvious. The conservatives scapegoat liberals and vice versa. If you think you are someone who does not scapegoat, you are wrong. Like, scapegoating is according to Girard, scapegoating is just embedded into our bones. That's what we do. And what the prophet does is not to not scapegoat or get rid of scapegoating, but actually what the prophet does is to turn it around and anti-scapegoat. That means the light comes on, right? And it lights up him or herself. With this being said, I'm going to end with what I think is the best quotation of the book that really summarizes this whole anti-scapegoating thing and is a good summary for the book, I think. He says, up to now, this has made far too many Christians into unconscious hypocrites, or what Jesus calls actors. And I do mean unconscious. Scapegoating is almost entirely an unconscious mechanism. The only way out of this mindset is quite simply to become conscious, which in all world religions has to do with deep and existential self-knowledge that is almost always painfully gained. So what he's saying is we are all unconscious to the ways that we scapegoat the minorities, or scapegoat each other. Like I said, Republicans, Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives, all that, we put blame on everybody else. We are unconscious to the plight of those who are different than us or not like us. And what needs to happen, in his opinion, is we need to wake up. We need to be woke from our unconsciousness. So in such a wonderful way, Richard Rohr has written a book that at the heart of which is the need for all of us to be woke. Now, I realize that's a word that's so misused in our society today, and it arouses a lot of different passions. But honestly, that is what the book, the main thrust of the book is, that what do we need to do today in this time that we are all so mad? We need to be able to look at other people outside of ourselves, and we need to wake up to the tragedies and injustices facing the collective whole. Okay, so that is my summary of Richard Rohr's book, The Tears of Things. I hope you enjoyed it, but I certainly hope you don't take this video for like all there is. I strongly encourage you to read the book for yourself, especially if you're interested in studying each individual prophet. Like, he commits a lot of time to talking about them individually and showing how they move through these stages. In this video, I very rarely talked about an individual prophet, but that's one of the things he does all throughout the book to show how all of this stuff that I'm saying happens in these prophets. My goal here was just to give you an overview, and should you choose to read it for yourself, a framework so that you'll be able to get a lot more out of the book. If you enjoyed that, you'd like to see more, visit me on my channel and possibly hit subscribe.